And the narrative that often the media will portray is that it's a land conflict, it's due to climate change, it's not really religiously driven. And what we are saying, as we've worked in that region for years, have been there firsthand, are saying that is not the case. It is a religiously driven, religiously motivated violence in that region that's happening against the country's Christians.
Hello, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phil McLear.
And welcome to the Anne and Film Scoop.
Yes.
It's still 2025, correct, Phil?
Yes, and I want to make a dramatic announcement.
Oh God, make a dramatic announcement.
The podcast is pivoting.
Pivoting?
In the new year.
Oh God.
I have not told you this, but an opportunity has arisen and we're completely pivoting.
Pivoting.
From now on, in the 2026, we're going to be known as a Minnesota daycare center.
A luring center.
A luring podcast. Luring podcast center.
A luring podcast center.
Yes. And we just would like Governor Walsh to know that we are.
That's right. We're available. We're available for grants of all kinds from every government agency.
Yes. And we actually will produce something.
That's right. We may not have any children here.
No.
But yes, but if you close your eyes and imagine it very hard, you could nearly imagine children being here.
Yes. So we'll get to work on that in the new year.
Very good. Excellent, Phil.
Yes.
Very good. What else is happening? So this is New Year's Eve. This podcast is coming out to people on New Year's Eve.
Well,
last day of 2025.
Well, we're looking forward to one of the last days of January, to the October 7 play at the Kennedy Center, or should we say
from now?
Should we say the Trump Kennedy Center?
I think we should probably say the Trump Kennedy Center, because I think that might be technically correct.
Well, is it legally correct?
Okay.
Is it legally correct? This is the question. But anyway, yes, so October 7 play, we'll talk more about that in the podcast. We have an interview with Brian Orme of Global Christian Relief about the real genocide
in Nigeria.
That's going on in Nigeria, not the fake one that we're told a lot about. And the one that the media is not covering. So it's a great interview, actually. You'll really appreciate it. And breaking news. I believe you have some breaking news now.
Yeah, breaking news is the LA Times have decided to do some really great reporting, and so we have to acknowledge that and celebrate that, actually.
And what's it about?
About the Palisades fire. They've done some incredible reporting on what's happened there, on the aftermath of that fire. And actually, it's in stark contrast to a story that's just come out from Christian Aid, a very large Christian charity in the UK, who also have some interest in the Palisades fire, but definitely haven't done some good reporting.
Yes, okay.
Let's put it that way.
Okay, I look forward to that. And my torrid afternoon with 60s sexpot Brigitte Bardot.
This is true.
Who died at the weekend, or died over Christmas, actually, I should say.
Yes.
And I don't think her death is connected to my torrid afternoon with her.
No, and I'm I think torrid might be a little. Yeah. Okay.
Very torrid.
Okay.
Well, you weren't there.
I wasn't there. I was in the mountains.
That's right. And the mostly unreported politics of Ms. Bardot may surprise you. And by the way, they say a lot about modern day France, but we'll go into that. Mm-hmm. And you have
and the UK's Imperial War Museum, the austere and celebrated Imperial War Museum, has gone completely woke in a very disappointing way. We'll come to that.
And actually, we also have a story about the British Pregnancy Advisory Service and abortion in the UK, and what's allowable and what's not. And actually, it ties in with a story we covered quite a while ago from Minnesota. I don't know if you remember that, Anne.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do remember that story. Yes.
So actually, I might resurrect that one on the Substack stories.io, because it's a great story and tells you a lot about the state of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So let's get on to the show. October 7.
On the 28th of January, our show, our play, October 7th, will be taking to the stage at the nation's capital, and on the 28th of January, and get tickets. Where can people buy tickets right now, Phil?
October7theplay.com. We really need people to go there. If you know anyone in the DC area who would be interested in this, as you know, we went to Israel after October 7, just after, interviewed people who survived, who fought back, who were heroes, who were humans, just who did amazing things and not amazing things on the day, but survived. And took their stories and put them on stage. And every word on stage is verbatim. Every word on stage is is from the words of the people who lived through that day. I remember showing the script to someone who shall remain nameless. It's kind of a liberal and in the theatre world, you know, never ask people in the theatre world for anything because they'll just try and lead you down the dark path. And she said, what that play needs is a journalist character to give the story's context.
Yeah, it's exactly what it didn't need.
It's exactly what it didn't need. In other words, to lie, you know, context, you know.
Yeah, it needed none of that. No.
So we declined that assistance of creating a journalistic character. But so many verbatim plays, by the way, have composite characters.
Well, we also discovered another thing, I think, potentially about verbatim plays when we had some people working on translations for us, etc., and certain people, you know, involved in parts of the play, and the number of people who wanted to soften what the witnesses had seen, had said. Yeah. So these are people who have just experienced the worst day of their lives, an absolute nightmare. They had given us the privilege of recording them, describing what happened to them. And for somebody sitting in New York, you know, or sitting in wherever, anywhere, by the way, comfortably, safely, to look at those words, sacred words, actually, that had been given to us, that we had been honoured to get to hear and to record, that somebody would say, you know what, it's a little bit, let's just take that out. And you know, I have to say, I felt like hitting people. It's like, how dare you? Like how dare you? And by the way, it's such a, I'm sorry, and by the way, that's not journalism, by the way.
No, it's not.
But, you know, journalism to actually want to change the words that someone has said about what happened and even actually people saying, for example, and then I heard him shout this, for example, and they were like, yeah. Well, actually, what the shouting was what Hamas were saying as he was trying to save his life and trying to get away from them, and basically Hamas were shouting, "Kill the Jews, shoot the Jews, shoot all the Jews." And it's like, yeah, that's what they actually said. So, like, who are you, by the way, like randomer? Like, who are you, randomer, to come in to insert yourself into that story and say it'd sound better if we softened that a bit?
Okay, I agree. There are levels of culpability here, in the sense some of the people who wanted to change it were Israeli or Jewish, and they wanted Israeli and Jewish people not to look as angry, not to look as flawed. You know, the country's been through a trauma, and they wanted people to look perfect and look superhuman, or just to
there was a bit of that. There was a bit of that.
And then there were people who didn't want, who wanted to cut the rough edges off Hamas, didn't want the words "kill the Jews" on the stage, and that, that's the headline. And these people were Jewish, but to be fair, they're not journalists. Mm-hmm. Right? I would argue they're not great dramatists either, but...
Or maybe they just don't know what the word verbatim means,
I can understand the urge of some of them from a...
Well, I think you make the point, and you have made it a number of times eloquently, and it's actually a really good point. And it's the reason why we were the right people to be there, because we weren't personally invested in any of it.
No.
And so we kind of, in a way, we kind of didn't care. So we just recorded what people said and said, you know what, well, we're going to be fair. The thing we cared about was being faithful to what they told us.
Well, we tried to get the best story out of them. For example, we didn't start off saying, tell us about the first thing on October 7th. We started on October 6th because we wanted to show a nation at peace, a domestic nation, a boring nation, boring. It's Simchat Torah, and I was going this place and we're divorced, so the children had to go there in the morning.
And I was making my favourite stew because everyone thinks it's marvellous and whatever. So there was all this domestic detail, this peace, by the way.
Peace.
Then there was, rudely interrupted, dramatically interrupted by this massacre. And so that there's something really powerful about that, because people are telling you, and they're getting all invested in their memories of their peaceful day on the Friday. Before the hell came on October 7th.
So that's why we were the perfect people to do it. So October 7th, the play, 14, actually more than 14 stories, 14 actors, because some of them play multiple characters. We've already had the usual nonsense of some actors. It's been about 4 performances of it now, 6 weeks off Broadway in New York. We've had a performance in Princeton, a performance in UCLA, a performance in Bogan, and different casts, but a core cast. Some of the people from New York came to Princeton and Bogan. UCLA was mostly new, but I want to keep this vague. But a couple of the actors that we had eyed to continue their roles would not go to the Kennedy Center.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah,
perhaps because of the change of management.
Yes, because of the change of management. So the next time you're watching TV or your niece or nephew tells you about how tough it is in the acting profession, walk the other way, because we've been offering, very often people of color and etc. acting roles. The Ferguson play, 9 of the actors walked out during rehearsal because the truth didn't match what they wanted it to be or what the media told them to be. So I'm just not that impressed actually with people.
And I'm not impressed with people talking about courage in the theatre, because what they think courage is in the theatre is somebody saying what they really, really believe in, but really loudly, maybe with a few curse words.
And what all their friends believe in too.
Yeah.
So they say things that wouldn't be out of place at a dinner party in the Upper West Side or Upper East Side, and they say it loudly and dogmatically and often, and they think that's courage.
And we've had this experience, by the way, a number of times with many projects we've done where someone has enthusiastically. I remember, I think it was with the Gosnell movie, where somebody enthusiastically took a role, and then the weekend came, and then the Monday came, and it was actually quite funny. Actually, I just remember it was like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't be in that movie. We're going on a holiday. I'd forgotten. We're going on a motorbike holiday in Europe,
yes,
or something. Wasn't that it?
Yes,
something like that.
Planned like 2 years in advance. Now, to be fair, a couple of actors.
I get this now. You being fair, Film. I don't think we should be fair at all.
We approach a couple of high-profile actors, and I wouldn't want them to think I'm talking about them.
No, we're talking about the Gosnell. I'm talking about the Gosnell movie,
and we know that they seriously considered it. The Kennedy Centre, and logistically it just didn't work for them. Okay. There are good people out there who don't care about their career when the truth comes, and who just want to tell the truth, and who genuinely consider this, and hopefully our paths will cross again. Hopefully logistically we can make this happen.
So we'd love to see you in Washington DC on January 28th.
Yes, please.
We'll put up the website on the screen there, but also it'll be in the show notes. And what is it again, Phil?
Well, you can see it on the screen on the YouTubes. October7theplay.com. October7theplay.com.
Okay.
So we hear a lot about the fake genocide in Gaza when it obviously wasn't. So from a fake genocide to a possibly real genocide, we're going to go now to speak to someone. There's currently a war against Christians in Nigeria. They're being wiped out by Islamic radicals, by Muslim gangs from northern Nigeria. And it's kind of an unreported story. So we are the Unreported Story Society. So let's go over now, and this is an interview I did just before we came on air with Brian Orme of Global Christian Relief, who has people on the ground there, and they do a lot of work there, and will tell us what's going on and why we need to care about the current war on Christianity in Nigeria. Let's go to that interview now. So as I was saying, the mainstream media are all too happy to discuss the fake genocide in Gaza and ignore real ones that are being attempted across the world, such as the ongoing campaign to terrorize and slaughter Christians in Nigeria. It really is an untold story. So today, to hear the truth about what's happening in Nigeria and what you need to know, we're joined by Brian Orme. Brian is the CEO of an organization called Global Christian Relief. They raise money, but they also provide material aid like food and shelter and spiritual relief through pastoral programs for persecuted Christians across the world. Brian has an MA in Biblical Studies from Trinity Bible College. He's previously worked as a journalist for Outreach magazine. Brian and his team have worked on the ground with Christians facing persecution, displacement, starvation, and in Nigeria's case, what seems to be an attempted genocide. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Phelan. It's great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Great. So, first of all, give us a history of Nigeria. Why is it currently ground zero for the murder of Christians, or is that where Christians are most under threat at the moment? And why is there violence particularly occurring there?
Yeah, it's definitely the most dangerous place in the world today to be a Christian. We see more Christians killed in Nigeria per capita than all the other countries combined. So it is definitely a risky place to practice your faith as a Christian. And some of the history that's really important to know is that Nigeria is one of the most populous nations in the world today, but it's also home to one of the largest Christian populations in the south and one of the largest Muslim populations in the north. And then you have a middle belt, which you hear that term is like the seam, where both of those religions mix, both of those faiths mix. And so today we're seeing just rising conflict, especially in the north. In the north, you have extremist groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP who are just again like pilfering through Christian communities, devastating them, and killing, abducting, burning. And that's there's no question about that in the north. It is unchecked violence. But what's becoming more and more the story is that middle belt region and what's happening there. And the narrative that often the media will portray is that it's a land conflict. It's due to climate change. It's not really religiously driven. And what we are saying, as we've worked in that region for years, have been there firsthand, are saying that that is not the case. It is a religiously driven, religiously motivated violence in that region that's happening against the country's Christians.
Mm-hmm. So these are Muslim attackers attacking Christians. What's the latest? I mean, how long has it been going on? When did it really start? Or has it always been going on? What's the latest? Has it got worse or better?
Yeah, it's definitely gotten worse, Phelim. And I would say it's going back to the early 2000s where you have kind of the development of Boko Haram, the infiltration or the flowing over of ISIS, and then unchecked infrastructure. And so again, like those religious lines where the north has been really predominantly Muslim, the south predominantly Christian, and yet there's again like that drive to take over, like again like Boko Haram and others who want to make Nigeria a completely Muslim country, put it under Sharia law, like they've done with many of the states there as well too. And that's just continued like over the last decade and plus. So it's been going on. Like I think it's the interesting thing is that this is not a new phenomenon. It's something that's been going on that hasn't gotten the attention that it needs to, with thousands of Christians being killed and abducted and displaced over the last decade plus. But in this recent year, we've seen some more exposure and awareness around that through celebrities and even through President Trump to bring attention. And we have seen an uptick in the killings this year with over 7,000 just through August. And it's getting the world's attention. I think before that too, there's almost like for media that they're leery of stepping into this kind of complicated issue and also leery of, again, reporting on religiously driven news stories as well too. And I think that's all those things are checked up to why we haven't seen it very much in the news and the media in the West. But now we're seeing a surge and it's getting attention, getting traction. And again, we're praying that this is the time that God would use to provide incredible movement, protection, pressure on the government, again, to protect its citizens.
You've mentioned a lot there, including President Trump, but what really struck me there was that number, 7,000 up until August of this year.
Yeah.
So 7,000 in the first, 7 or 8 months of this year, 7,000 Christians murdered for their faith. And nobody knows about it, or the media is not reporting on it.
Yeah, and it's one of the largest, again, it's like in the top 5 largest countries with the Christian population in the world. So what happens there reshapes the global church. I mean, it's a big story that we need to draw attention to. We need to focus on. And again, our goal is to try to wake up the church here in the West to see what's happening and take action and be an advocate and not avoid it, not kind of, push it off to the side, but to see it as our Christian family who is under attack and one of the most populous countries in the world today.
Well, I'm from Northern Ireland, so it suddenly occurred to me we need to know these things from Northern Ireland. When you say Christian, what faith are they? Are they Protestant, Catholic, evangelical? What is it? What's the breakdown there?
Yeah, there's a mix. There's definitely, and we work in IDP camps across the Middle Belt too, and there's a lot of Catholic priests. There's a lot of evangelicals. To dig into the split, I would just say this is that it's been one of those powerful things that when the church is attacked, that those religiously drawn lines inside the Christian church they've just disappeared. And so you have Catholics helping Protestants and Protestants helping Catholics and people working together because the issue is so urgent and the needs are so great.
Yeah, what also prompted that was, I know Pope Leo for his Christian message condemned the war in Gaza, or condemned what he said was, I can't remember, but he condemned Israel in Gaza. Did he mention Nigeria?
I don't believe so. Yeah.
I don't believe so either. A strange priority to mention, really, a place where there's now a ceasefire, and there was never really a genocide. But that, let's just say there was a genocide there, but there's an ongoing war on Christians in Nigeria, and he didn't mention it in his Christmas message. Maybe you don't want to get into criticizing the Pope. I can criticize the Pope, but maybe is that a step too far for you?
I'll let you take that post, Phelan, but I would say this. Okay. I think it's important to know, like, these are things I've wrestled with, our team has wrestled with and been convicted about too, is the fact that, again, it largely goes unnoticed or just not reported, not cared for. And I do think there's a sense of, like, there's not a power play to be held for us as Americans. It's far from our voting influence. It's far from our control, feels far off in general. And again, for reporters, it might be challenging to report on it, but it is happening. It is real and it is devastating. And we need to raise the alarm flags today.
Yeah, there's no doubt that these are Muslim attacks on Christians in the sense, I think you've reported that people have said Allahu Akbar, etc. I've read your reports there that pastors have talked about hearing Allahu Akbar. Is it exclusively jihadi? Is that the driving force behind it? Tell us more about the detail.
Yeah, it's definitely a jihadist movement. And I've been to Nigeria multiple times. I've spent time with survivors, heard their stories and firsthand accounts. And in fact, again, we're so serious about it. We sent a team into the Plateau State just a few months ago to meet with pastors and Christians who had just recently been attacked and the churches burned. And again, the narrative is consistent. The way that they attack at night, they attack the churches, they attack the pastor's home, they're killing, abducting, and again, they're forcing people to convert or be killed or leave. And it's very clear, again, like that the message is, it's an extremist Muslim agenda that's coming through there. It's not, again, if it was just about land, I think there would be some negotiations, there would be some difference, there'd be an even amount of attacks on non-Christian buildings that there are in churches and on pastors. It's definitely a targeted, as we talk to that, again, meeting with multiple villages and leaders, that it is the same kind of routine and template across all of those villages, that is pushing out the church. There's even bringing all the pews together and trying to burn the church to the ground, defecating in it. All of these things that, again, show that there is a disregard and a target on the Christian communities there in the Plateau State.
Yeah. So what do you think about, well, actually, you mentioned there, you keep saying that people, are the mainstream media trying to portray this as some kind of land war and ignoring the religious when they do cover it, as you say, climate change or a land war, and ignoring the religious element? Is that what you're saying, or is that
it definitely is. The typical mainstream narrative is that this is a land conflict that's driven by climate change. And I would say this is that there are those elements. You have typical agrarian farmers who are Christians in the Middle Belt, and then you have nomadic herders. Again, and then I would say this, it's not like we're trying to like paint a large brushstroke over all Fulanis. There's many Fulanis who work in tandem and are neighbors with Christian communities, but it's the extremists, it's the jihadist, Fulanis that come down through there and attack, and pillage and abduct and take women and children, and it's devastating. And so I do think there's a sense of it's much easier to wipe that across the thing as a climate conflict than it is to say this is clearly a religiously driven and motivated violence that we're seeing in the Middle Belt. And again, the North, I feel like, is pretty clear. We know that's extremism. It's hard pressed to say that's anything different with Boko Haram and ISWAP, but it's the Middle Belt that's in contention that typically gets labeled as a climate conflict and not labeled as it was. And I would say this, the land definitely plays a part. There's other things that seem to inflame it, but we do know at the heart of it, even talking to believers there. And again, I met with a young woman named Safratu who was abducted, and she was taken in prison. And they, again, were forcing her to convert, made her wear the hijab, made her pray the Muslim prayers until she escapes. And she went through unimaginable traumas in there, but lasted 2 years in those camps. And again, it's just hard pressed to me that all the firsthand accounts that we have, and even this recent trip, meeting with multiple Christians and leaders and believers in these villages, all have the same narrative that this was a driven attack because of their Christian community in the Middle Belt.
You mentioned, you said Boko Haram and ISWAP. Could you tell us what ISWAP is? Because I don't think
Yeah,
many people
sure.
know.
So ISWAP is a branch of ISIS, and it stands for Islamic State West Africa Province. And it's kind of an
Mhm.
ISIS spillover, kind of a breakup of Boko Haram, some ideological changes. And Boko Haram has obviously been there for a while, and their actual name means Western education is forbidden. So again, they're looking to eradicate anything that would come from the West, and they see Christianity as the prime target and the prime import, even though obviously it's not.
So, talking of ISWAP, talking of ISIS and West African province, there was recently an American strike on Nigeria, which President Trump said was against the ISIS terrorist scum in northwest Nigeria. Can you tell us about that attack and how it's been treated on the ground? And do you know much about it? What have your sources been telling you?
Yeah, I'm still waiting to connect with our partners on the ground to get their perspective on it. Just happening a couple of days ago, but I do know this, like from what we do know, I mean, it was a coordinated attack, really the first of its kind with the U.S. government in coordination with the Nigerian government, and again, it was an attack on, I mean, ISIS, I mean, in that region, in the Sokoto state, and so
Mhm.
again, it's the first step. And I would say this, like what we have seen in this last season is the raising alarms of the awareness through many people, Nicki Minaj, Bill Maher, and then President Trump, putting Nigeria back on the countries of political concern list that hasn't been on there for years is a critical move, because then we can move towards sanctions, put some pressure on that government as well. But this was the first unprecedented step to see a U.S. government work with the Nigerian government to make a dedicated attack on, I mean, ISIS in that region as well too. So I'm anxious to hear what, I mean, our partners on the ground are seeing and hearing from that as well too. Obviously,
Mhm.
from our part, our job is not to drive war or to, to kill or to bomb. And I do think, Philim, there's going to be a long-term structural change that needs to happen to protect the citizens of Nigeria. So one bombing is a very small drop in a big pond for sure, but it is signaling something that actually the U.S. is starting to care about what's happening to Christians in this genocide in Nigeria today.
There's a couple of things you talked about. Nicki Minaj has got behind this. I wasn't aware of that. Tell me
Yes,
more.
she has. So she's spoken out. She started with a few tweets where she read about the atrocities that were happening to Nigerian Christians, and she spoke up about it on her platforms. She's been invited to a couple other, I think even to the UN to speak on it as well, just recently. So again, it's grabbed her heart, and I think even Bill Maher on his show, I mean, is not a Christian, not from that side, but he's just saying, hey, what's happening to Christians in Nigeria
Mhm.
is unavoidable, and anybody who doesn't see this, doesn't have their eyes open. So I think there's voices like that are starting to pound that drum to say, hey, this is a real issue, and it's one that we can't ignore just because it's not convenient and it's not tidy,
Yeah,
and there's not a lot of reporting on it.
and it doesn't, and it doesn't allow you to demonize Jewish people, I suppose, which is,
Yeah,
that's
there's a lot of things that it doesn't do. You know what I mean?
yes.
For
So
sure.
it doesn't appeal to those who want to blame the Jews for everything. You talked about, changing that one bombing won't change the infrastructure. What's the problem with the infrastructure there? Why isn't the government cracking down on this? Why are they not taking over? Why are they no control over the northern or the middle belt now? What's happening? Are there no security forces? Tell me more.
Yeah, and I would say this, Phelim, it's obviously a complex, issue to think through. How you're going to police a whole, a very unstructured, rural, landscape that's
Hmm.
vast. So I do know that the Nigerian government likely doesn't have the forces, to go into all these places and doesn't have control of all the
Yeah.
places either. So I think those are struggles there, and the Nigerian government has been sharing that they want to protect its citizens, including Christians, when these happen. But we're still seeing, again, like some, I would say, softness in their perspective too, about it being more of an issue for all of its citizens and less targeted against Christians. And I think if we could
Hmm.
get them to move in that direction, to acknowledge this is in many ways, there's obviously many people, even some Muslims are caught up in this and other religions are caught up in this, but in many of these areas, it's targeted to the Christian communities.
Hmm.
If they could just start, and because the words matter, if they could
Yes.
acknowledge that, share that, that would make some movements. And then I think that if they could show that there's consequences, that when these attacks do happen, there's consequences for those involved, which I think will be, it would take a lot of resources by far and a lot of planning. And then also I think it needs to show that we're taking care of those people who are the victims in this, who are traumatized by that. So I do think the Nigerian government, again, I'm hoping that this is kind of the stimulus that they need to provide that protection for all of its citizens, including as Christians. But I think that it's in their side. I think they've had a lot of talk about protection, but the lack of follow through has been evident.
Yeah. What can people in America do? What can people in Europe do to help stop this, to help Christians in Nigeria?
I think, the first thing to me is I think every, especially Christian, should make reading about what's happening in Nigeria a regular part of their rhythm, their daily rhythm. And I think as you see the news, start praying through that, not just looking at it, from a political lens or from a, whatever it might be, but look at it from the lens of the global church and start making prayer for our persecuted family, especially in Nigeria, because we know, thousands are being killed, every year. And it's something that needs our attention. And then I think there's practical steps of reaching out in the US to our congressmen to say, we need to make this an issue. Like if we have thousands and thousands of people writing letters to their congressmen to just say, this has got the attention of the church. And again, the next step would be, I think, personal action for us. We're asking people to give, whether that's a one-time gift to support or becoming a monthly partner with Global Christian Relief. We're working in the camps. We're working to rebuild churches and communities in Plateau State. And we're standing alongside these Christian communities to give them what they need, whether that's trauma counseling, education, emergency relief, even Bibles, in many of these regions where they don't have access to it, or audio Bibles for those who were never taught to read with it as well, to strengthen their faith. But our goal is to stand alongside the church, and we want to call the U.S. Church alongside us to say, hey, you can make an impact, with multiple families for generations in Nigeria if you step in now to provide your resources.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we've spoken to you. It is an unreported stories, and that's what we do, reporting on unreported stories. It's the figures are truly shocking, actually.
They are.
7,000. It deserves a lot more attention, and we'll be pushing it out. How can people follow you, follow your organization? What's your social media handles? What's your website?
Yes. Yeah. If you could go to gcrelief.org, you'll see a lot more. You can learn more about us. There's even on the homepage there's opportunities for you to give and learn more about what's happening in Nigeria, but also what's happening around the world with persecuted Christians. This is a very violent area, but across the world today, we're seeing an increase in persecution against Christians across the Middle East, across South Asia, and it's devastating, but yet the church is still resilient, and we're seeing powerful stories. So I would say go to our website, and then you'll see that too. Like if you go to Facebook is one of our key places to follow on for stories, and also Instagram. And again, on the homepage, if you sign up for weekly emails, that could be the first trigger to help you engage with what's happening around the world to the global church. How can you pray? How can you step into those stories? And one of the greatest things I think, Phelim, is that when Christians do step into these stories, it not only does something to empower the global persecuted church, but it enriches our faith and believing completely that it's in the DNA of every Christian to care for its suffering body. And if we ignore it, then we ignore our own ability to grow in our faith and connect to the body of Christ in the way God intended it to be.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. And are you on Twitter or X yourself?
Yes, we are. Yep. If you go to Global Christian Relief or GC Relief on X, you'll see us there as well too.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Brian. And we're going to come back to you and talk to you again. And hopefully we will have better news, and hopefully people will pay attention to what's going on there and bring about peace to that land.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Phelim. Thank you so much for covering this important story. Appreciate it.
So 7,000 people, 7,000 Christians have been killed up to August of this year. In this year, that was a truly shocking number of people. It's a slaughter,
and it's not a front page news story.
No.
Everywhere. Almost anywhere actually.
Yeah. So, Anne, you have a story about the LA Times.
Yeah, I mean, it's, obviously we think the LA Times are pretty awful in general, but they really are. They've done some pretty incredible reporting on the aftermath of the Palisades fire, and particularly on the report that was organised after the Palisades fire, where they decided, we need to have an after action report. What happened? What went wrong? What went right? It all sounds very good. Sounds very reasonable. You can't imagine that given something
useful.
And given something of this magnitude, incredibly important. Mm-hmm. So the LA Times obtained not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but all 7 drafts of the after action report.
Yes.
I don't think there's any real problem with there being lots of drafts, by the way. I don't think there's any real problem with that.
Yes.
However, what they discovered through going through all these 7 drafts was a huge number of deletions and revisions in the drafts, which amounted to an effort to basically downplay the failures of the LAFD, and particularly the LAFD leadership and the city. But the LAFD, this actual report. Okay. Funny enough, interesting, because that's something that comes up actually. This is just the actions of the LAFD, so it's not things, for example, to do with the water or the reservoirs or all that, because that's another part of the story. But this is incredibly significant. So the first draft apparently was completed by August, maybe even earlier, and then the deletions and other changes began behind closed doors. And don't forget, this fire, which it caused the death of 12 people, at least 12 people. Now they're saying, some estimates are a lot more than that now, and destroyed thousands of homes, billions and billions of dollars in terms of damage. So here's the kind of thing that's
an incredible destruction of just well-being.
Oh my God,
awful.
People lost their homes with all their everything, every memory. And we've been up there, we've driven up there. Actually, we'll show some pictures of what it looks like right now. I mean, it's Dresden. It was really shocking. And we drove for miles and miles in one direction, miles and miles in the other direction. And it's the same. And then there'll be this weird thing where there's one house. Yeah. But let me get back to this report. So here's the kind of thing that the Los Angeles Times have discovered. In one instance, a Los Angeles Fire Department official removed language saying the decision to not fully staff up and pre-deploy all available crews and engines ahead of the extreme wind forecast did not align with the department's policy and procedures during red flag days.
And this was a red flag day.
Right. So what they did was they took that out, because that was in the original report. They took that out, and instead they wrote, the final report said the number of engine companies rolled out ahead of the fire went above and beyond the standard LAFD pre-deployment matrix. So they actually literally turned it on its head.
Yeah, but it's very cleverly written, right? They've taken out the reference to red flag days and said, standard LAFD pre-deployment matrix, but they don't say it's what was standard for a red flag day. So it's cleverly deceptive.
Okay.
Or maybe it's not funny. I
just think I have such a clear memory of this. Because we were in Ireland, and then I had a meeting in Florida. You went to London to do a recording of the Grouping Gangs video. And I remember so I really remember this very well. They talked about the Santa Ana winds. They talked about the conditions being like the worst ever or whatever. They talked about that for weeks. There was no surprise here. No. Everyone expected an event. But anyway, and then decided not to deploy everyone as they were supposed to and required to do. They didn't do it. But anyway, so they changed that around. Another deleted passage, just a second example. Another deleted passage in the report said that some crews waited more than an hour for an assignment the day of the fire. So to stand around waiting, what should we do next? A section on failures was renamed. So there was an actual section, a subheading, failures. It was renamed primary challenges. And an item saying that crews and leaders had violated national guidelines on how to avoid firefighter deaths and injuries was scratched. 2 drafts contain notes written in the margins, including a suggestion to replace the cover image. So the cover image on the original report was like fright, can you imagine, with flames.
Terrible,
and that. And so the written in the margin, they said, let's instead, just show palm trees with an orange sky in the background, right? But no, what they did was they wanted to change it to, have a more positive one. So what they did in the end, they had a few iterations, but in the end, they just had an LAFD seal because they didn't want to have anything, too negative.
Yes.
But to me, the most important part of the story, so this is the part that is really the important part is, and this story about the Lac Man fire. So, and how people handled that. So how fire officials handled a smaller New Year's Day blaze, right? So the big fire started on the 7th of January. But on New Year's Day, there was a blaze called the Lachman Fire that rekindled into the massive Palisades fire 6 days later.
This is shocking to people. So the Palisades fire was started because someone lit a fire.
Well, I was holding that back to the end.
Go ahead.
But yeah, so some drafts described an on-duty LAFD captain calling the fire station 23 in the Palisades on January the 7th to report that the Lachma fire started up again, right? Mm-hmm. Started up again, indicating the captain's belief that the Palisades fire was caused by a reignition to an earlier blaze. The reference was deleted in one draft, then restored in the public version, which otherwise contains only a very brief mention of the previous fire. Weeks after the report's release, the LA Times reported that a battalion chief ordered, this is so important, ordered firefighters to roll up their hoses and leave the burn area on January the 2nd, even though the firefighters complained that the ground was still smouldering and rocks remained hot to the touch. Former LAFD chief Patrick Butler, who is now the chief of Redondo Beach, agreed that the Lachma fire should have been addressed in the report and said the deletions were a deliberate effort to hide the truth and cover up the facts. The final after-action report does not mention that a person called authorities to report seeing smoke in the area on January the 3rd. Wow. The LAFD has since provided conflicting information about how it responded to that call. Even with the deletions, the published report, so that's the Lachma thing. I think the Lachman part of it is, to me, is extraordinary because basically it's very, very clear. And obviously there now is a federal investigation because someone has been arrested
for the Lachman
fire, starting the Lachman fire.
But by starting the Lachman fire, you started the Palisades
fire. We started
fire.
the whole thing, 100%. Yeah, exactly. But in their final report, even the report at the very end, after the 7 drafts and the deletions and all of that and the fancying up the language, even with that, the actual published report pointed to a disorganized response, failures in communication, and chiefs who didn't understand their roles. The report found that top commanders lacked a fundamental knowledge of wildland firefighting tactics, including basic suppression techniques.
Well, but
I know what you're going to say.
But
the great thing was there was so much DEI involved.
There was a lot of diversity.
Marvelous diversity. A paperwork error resulted in the use of only 1/3 of state-funded resources that were available for pre-positioning in high-risk areas.
Wow.
And when the fire broke out on the morning of January the 7th, the initial dispatch called for only 7 engine companies when the weather required 27. There was confusion also among firefighters over which radio channel to use. This is, to me, sounds so basic stuff, right? The report said that the 3 LA County engines showed up within the first hour, requesting an assignment and receiving no reply. 4 other LAFD engines waited 20 minutes without an assignment. And to people listening, maybe they think, 20 minutes is, whatever. 20 with a fire, 20 minutes is like forever, right?
Especially at the beginning.
In the early afternoon, the staging area where engines were checking in was overrun with fire. And as I said earlier, so federal prosecutors have charged a former Palisades resident with deliberately setting the Lachman fire. So to summarize all of that, and this is where this segues into a kind of almost comical story. It's very fair to say, given what you've just heard, first of all, that the fire was caused by arson.
Yes.
Compounded by incompetence, right?
DEI-fueled incompetence.
DEI-fueled incompetence, right?
Actually, that's very interesting. We should talk. You're talking about the next.
But I actually am segueing from that into this extraordinary, because literally I'm reading this LA Times story, which is extraordinary. Yes. And I'm looking at all these different websites, looking at news over Christmas. And then I realize and read about Christian Aid. So Christian Aid, who's a UK charity, and their mission, by the way, is to eradicate poverty, which is fantastic, support civil society and provide disaster relief and development aid, guided by the belief that everyone is equal in the sight of God. I like the last bit. So they have decided, in their wisdom, and they're a very, very big charity, millions and millions of pounds. They have an annual climate report. Christian Aid has an annual climate report, and it's called Counting the Cost. And this year it's called Counting the Cost 2025, a year of climate breakdown, assesses the economic and human toll of climate-related disasters worldwide in 2025. Sounds like, fine. What was the biggest climate change-related incident? What was the biggest most costliest of all of them in 2025. Do you think,
according
to Christian Aid?
Well, I think you've kind of given it.
Did I give it away there? Yes. According to Christian Aid, the most expensive climate change disaster was, in fact, the Palisades fire. I think they're missing a few wee details there now.
I think they're missing a few wee details.
A few wee details are missing there.
I think it was the climate that got that nutcase Uber driver out of his car on New Year's Eve to go down and light the cliff at the Palisades.
Yeah.
That was put out, or wasn't put out properly. It smoldered for 7 days and then reignited.
And even though the firefighters had asked if they could stay and work on putting out that Lackman fire, they were told, no,
and
away you go.
Someone said they saw it smoking.
And that was ignored, and by the way, so just again, because Phelim made a good point at the beginning, the thing that's not mentioned here, this is just an analysis of the LAFD's behaviour. This is only an analysis of what happened and what went wrong there. This is not even talking about the city, which is another thing altogether. So that the Santa Ynez, I believe it's called, the Santa Ynez Reservoir was closed for repairs for the past couple of, nearly a year.
A third of the fire hydrants weren't working.
20%, at least 20% of the fire hydrants weren't working. So there's, we're not even getting into any of that. But upset. I actually find this upsetting because Christian Aid. Can you imagine the number of really nice people who donate to Christian Aid in the UK?
Yeah.
And that's what the money is going for. To basically give, like, if and people talk about disinformation, this is the very definition of disinformation. No, actually, the Palisades fire was not caused by climate change. The climate has always been changing and there's been wildfires here forever. And they knew this was happening. And instead of actually doing something about it, and I suppose somebody starting a fire, that's always going to be a problem.
Yeah, no, they're always going to be with us, those people.
Yes. Okay, moving right along, Phelim. I'm really interested in retelling this story of Phelim's meeting up with Brigitte Bardot.
You've just kind of ruined it all.
No, I haven't.
How can I cast it as a torrid afternoon with a sultry 60s sex symbol if you're looking forward to telling it? I should put
the context here that we were on a holiday in the Transylvanian mountains with family, and Phelim found out that Brigitte Bardot had arrived in Bucharest. Why had she arrived in Bucharest? It's a great story.
Yes.
Can I just say why she had arrived? I mean, it's just fabulous. Because probably a lot of you know that Brigitte Bardot, who was obviously, incredibly famous sex symbol around the world, at whatever point, and I suppose you've looked all this up, Phelim, but she just completely gave up on her Hollywood career, on her massive, massive career, and decided to devote her whole life to take the welfare of animals. Anyway, she decided when were we in Romania, Phelim? 24 years ago?
2000, early 2000s.
So we were there about, over 20 years ago, and there was a huge problem in Bucharest, particularly with street dogs. And it was a political action where a lot of people who, under communism, the dogs had been taken off them, their land had been taken off them, whatever. So they had let the dogs run free when they brought them to the city. And of course, the dogs had all mated, and there were dogs in packs running around the place. And it was a massive problem.
There were literally packs of dogs on every street corner.
And so people like ourselves, and we knew people who got bitten, and you had to if you get bitten by a rabid dog, by the way, you have to, and you don't even know if it's not rabid or whatever, so you have to get all these injections into your solar plexus. Really terrible. So not a good thing, right? So the mayor at the time, because Romania was trying to become a member of the European Union, and they were thinking that this makes us look like savages. So they thought, you know what, we're going to solve this dog problem. We're going to start lifting these dogs off the street and euthanizing them, right?
Yes.
So Brigitte Bardot, wherever she was living at the time in, Saint-Tropez or whatever, heard about this and she flew in. And as I said, we were on holidays in the mountains and my husband heard that Brigitte Bardot had arrived in Bucharest to save the dogs.
Yes.
And Phelim was working as the Financial Times correspondent for Romania and Bulgaria. And so he abandoned his family to go to Bucharest to meet Brigitte Bardot.
And to spend the afternoon, a torrid afternoon with sultry 60s.
At the Hilton Palace. What was it called? The Athene Palace.
Which was the big hotel in Bucharest, which was the centre of espionage in the 30s. Many of those, what was the great book, that trilogy of war novels? Anyway, Bucharest was a centre of intrigue and espionage, and this hotel was the centre of the intrigue and espionage during World War II. So yes, I met Ms. Bardot there. We spent an afternoon. I did a lunch with the FT with her. I remember I had a vegetarian omelette, I think it was, or vegetarian.
Because she couldn't bear the...
Well, I felt I wouldn't push it. I wouldn't.
I don't think I knew that. Yes. A vegetarian omelette?
It was a vegetarian quiche.
Okay, fair enough.
Because she was French, you know.
She allowed eggs.
I thought I would do a quiche. You know, it's a French dish, isn't it?
That's very French.
Yeah, so I got a vegetarian quiche, and her lunch consisted of cigarettes.
Oh, she just chain smoked.
Yes.
It's fabulous.
Very French. And anyway, we had a great time all together. And
the hotel had a massive problem with her because what had she done, Phelim?
She had rescued a number of street dogs.
And brought them into her gorgeous suite in the Athena Palace, which would have been really gorgeous.
And they then behaved as street dogs would do in a cooked
in a
I think she paid them all. I think she was loaded, and so she just said, I will pay for the repairs of the room. And anyway, I spent a torrid afternoon with her.
You said she was lovely.
She was lovely. She was very nice. She was very nice. But not many people know. Actually, I mean, it's you know. So
the reason we're doing this is because she has died at the age of, what did you say, Phelim?
87.
Good for her.
But actually, did you know, you probably did, she was fined 5 times and this is Europe, for making racist comments.
Fabulous. What did she say?
It's very hard to find them. You can get those buried in stories.
I see here.
Yes, yeah. But it's very hard to find them. And the reason I think it's so hard to find them, the media will talk about it, she was fine, but they won't actually give the comments, because the comments are now in retrospect. Like,
she was very wise.
She was very wise. Most recently, she was fined €15,000 for a letter about animal slaughter that she wrote to Nicolas Sarkozy, the Prime Minister or President, which referred to Muslims as this population that is destroying our country by its acts. She was fined €8,000 for saying that. She also was fined for making a statement about the growing number of mosques in France while our church bells fall silent.
Oh, dear.
And she also lamented, she was fined for this, 2001, my country, France, my homeland, my land is again invaded by an overpopulation of foreigners, especially Muslims. In her 2003 book, A Scream in the Silence, she warned of the Islamization of France and said of Muslim immigration, over the last 20 years, we've given in to a subterranean, dangerous and uncontrolled infiltration, which not only resists adjusting to our laws and customs, but which, as the years will pass, will attempt to impose its own. Well, you
very wise,
out of the mouths of sultry 60s sex symbols.
Yeah, exactly. No dumb blonde.
No dumb blonde.
Yeah.
So,
and I see she obviously also had a problem with the way that animals were being slaughtered
by the Muslims.
With the halal.
So rest in peace, Bridget Bardot. I wish people had listened to you and not fined you.
That's right. You'll never forget, Phelim.
I'll never forget. And I hope you appreciated I had a vegetarian omelette. No, a vegetarian quiche.
Very good. Very good. And the other story that caught my eye over the holidays was the Imperial War Museum in the UK. So the Imperial War Museum, I think, was started around the same time as the Second World War to just remember the heroism of so many people who, and the horror of war, by the way, and just extraordinary things that people have done, and it's very, very lauded. People, very, very highly respected until now, where it's decided to go pure woke. So apparently they're celebrating or commemorating or whatever, memorializing that 25 years ago they allowed gays in the army. I think that's kind of the reason for what they've decided to do. But what I'm focusing on, and I think what a lot of people are reacting really badly to, is that 1/3 of they've got a new exhibition to kind of commemorate this, and 1/3 of the exhibits are devoted to transgenderism. And people basically are saying, people are accusing the Imperial War Museum of reframing history, by the way, and to give it woke appeal. Yes. So. More than a third, as I said, more than a third of the exhibits are about transgenderism. Wow. And an example is one centers around, a dress made from a mosquito net that was worn apparently for a drag show during the Second World War. The wearer was Gunner Charles Woodhams, who donned it to dance with an officer during a makeshift theatre review in Changi prison, by the way, in Singapore. You'll remember, right? Yeah. A notorious Japanese prisoner of war camp where 850 British soldiers were executed or died from maltreatment. The guide notes drag performances in Changi prison in Singapore during the Second World War were vital for prisoners' morale.
Can I just say, look, it's completely wrong to represent that as drag performance.
Yes.
This is it's the British pantomime. It's two things. It's the British pantomime tradition of a man dressing up as a widow Twanky at the pantomime. Yes. It's not drag. It's impersonation. It's when people on TV have a puppet, and the puppet can say outrageous things because it's the puppet, even though you know it's the person.
Yes.
Or that woman, Mrs. Merton, a young comic who dressed up as an old lady and said the most outrageous things to her guests because she was just an old lady.
Yeah.
And so that's the role of the panto dame in British theatre. And it was particularly used whilst when soldiers entertaining other soldiers, because 99% of the soldiers were men.
Yes.
So to have they couldn't have women on the entertainment, so someone would dress up as a woman, but everyone it was a joke.
Knew, and it was a joke. It was a joke, and everyone was in on the joke. Exactly.
It was in on a joke, and the person who dressed up as the woman could say outrageous things to the officers and could dance. An enlisted man couldn't dance with the officer, right? And especially a man couldn't dance with another. But if he dressed up as a woman, and of course the officer would have to go along with it.
To try and cheer people up and all of that.
Yeah. They're all in on this joke. This
is not this contemporary craziness that we're dealing with.
No.
So Professor Anthony Glees, who's a military expert at Buckingham University, said that the whole focus, this transgender focus at the Imperial War Museum, was greatly disturbing. Yeah. He criticised the institution revered around the globe for trivialising often brutal moments in history to portray a woke narrative. I mean, he sounds like a great guy. He says the experiences of what we now call the LGBTQ community are no less, he made this point, are no less worthy of understanding than those of straight service personnel. Yeah. But with this display, they trivialize true stories of bravery and courage, and what is worse, appear to be doing so in order to reframe the lessons of history, to make a woke appeal to young Brits on behalf of a highly controversial special interest group. I hope the Imperial War Museum will think again about this. History should never be rewritten to proselytize or normalize any particular lifestyle. Yeah. I thought that was really great.
No, and he's not saying, he's pointing out that gay people probably did have acts of bravery and courage.
Yes.
But this is a rewriting of history.
And one third of the exhibits being devoted to the transgender thing is, it's very obviously political.
Yeah. So actually,
you wanted to make a point. I know that.
You were going to do this story, but the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, they have said it's now okay for Indian women. The British Pregnancy Advisory Service is the biggest abortion provider. It's very funny. Planned Parenthood.
Same thing here.
British Pregnancy Advisory Service, as in advising you to get rid of your pregnancy. They said it's okay. Femicide is okay. It's okay to abort
baby
girls, which is big in the immigrant community in the UK, particularly Indian women and Indian families. And that just reminded me of talking of Somalia earlier on. We did the story. So there was a story a few years ago in Somalia, in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, you thought it was Somalia.
Yeah, where they were, oh my God, this is amazing.
Amazing.
In the local maternity hospital, they've had this thing they've never seen before. It's the world's biggest coincidence. 17 boys born
in a row. And no one had ever heard the like.
The chances of this happening are just extraordinary. Amazing. And now, look, the 18th is a girl. And no one... Of course, all the names of the boys being born were Muhammad this and Muhammad that. And no one's going, I wonder, is that got anything to do with sex-selective abortion among the Somali community in Minnesota? And, it does. That's the reason why you have these incredible coincidences of 17 male births in a row. And the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, the Planned Parenthood of the UK, say that's okay.
Well, the last thing that they want to be called is racist, you see. So you have to respect all cultures because apparently all cultures are equal. Of course, that's complete nonsense. The really sad thing about that story is the fact that there's two things. One is that no one is speaking out. Feminists aren't speaking out who should be speaking out because the last thing they want to be called is racist. Mm-hmm. But the second thing that I think it points to is the fact that this is a story. And the reason it's because it's kind of unusual, it's like, oh, really? But the story that they're not telling is that almost everywhere in the world, it is legal. It is perfectly legal to abort based on sex. For example, all over America, it is perfectly legal to kill off baby girls because you don't want a girl. It's perfectly legal all over the place. So actually, the UK in some ways is actually kind of an outlier. But then the UK are like, the UK is like the UK allow late term abortion if a baby has a cleft palate. By the way, we have relatives who have cleft palates. By the way, who are highly qualified. So this is complete madness. Cleft palate. You can abort up to 9 months. But this particular issue, it highlights the fact. This is the point that I kind of want to make: is that all over America there is no problem with sex selection and abortion. None. Zero.
So you can tell your doctor that's the reason.
Yeah. Well, actually, you can abort.
So in the UK, you're not allowed to tell your doctor. You have to say, I just don't feel like it. I woke up in the wrong side of the bed this morning. I think
I literally did something on this in the places where most people live in America. So California, New York, all the biggest population centers, there is abortion through all 9 months and for any reason. It's not a story that gets an awful lot of press because people don't want to highlight it, but it's the actual law. It's the actual truth.
Yeah.
New Mexico, Colorado, all these places, surprising places, Alaska as well, I believe. And this is what they push for. And part of it is because the last thing you want to do is to exclude anything, because then it starts to question what's included. So that's why they don't like. I think that's one of the main reasons why they don't want to say up to 20 weeks, up to 20 whatever number of weeks. They don't want to do that because once you start looking at the weeks, you're going, what?
Yeah. Well,
like we had that experience when we were doing the Gosnell film, and somebody said, I remember having an argument with somebody who had worked in the White House, I think.
No, and worked for Ted Kennedy.
And worked for Ted Kennedy. And I had this argument with her, like really informed, very political woman.
Nice, and a really good woman. Not particularly ideological about this issue.
And she was from Pennsylvania. That person is actually from Pennsylvania. And we had like this row. I mean, she just wouldn't accept that it was legal in Pennsylvania to have an abortion up to 6 months. And of course, that's the actual law. I mean, that's the actual law. I mean, and she thought that was shocking. And it's like, you ain't seen nothing yet, by the way, because in most of America where people live, it's all through 9 months.
No, you're right. If you say it's legal up to 24 weeks, which is 6 months, that's shocking.
Because people know, and that's the reason they say weeks, they don't say months.
Yes.
Because when you say months, people go, what?
But also then when you think about it, what's the difference between 23 weeks and 6 days?
Correct. And the next day.
And 23 hours.
Yes.
What's the difference? What's 22 weeks?
No, that's exactly what you don't want people to do, you see. That's why they do the 9 months, because once you start breaking it down like that, people are like, oh God, I don't like the sound of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually we talked about Somalia a little bit, and I know we have to go, but I
have one more thing to do.
Oh yeah, you have to, that's right. Nick Shirley, the guy who exposed the daycare centres. I mean, brilliant piece of journalism. I would have done the journalism differently, I suppose. Knocking on a window saying, I want to see the children. Yeah. You're giving people an out there saying, I didn't want to expose the children to cameras and they have privacy rights. Now, the reality is there's no children there. And if he wanted to wait every morning with a camera outside to see the children being brought in, but he needed to capture it immediately. We all know this is a scam. We all know they're running off with billions of dollars. So well done, Nick Shirley. And shame on the mainstream media. You have something you'd like to say. Yeah.
So Douglas Murray wrote a really, really funny, really brilliant, actually, essay in The Spectator recently about a part of it. I'll just give this one part of it, which is a part where he was under the illusion that he had read the Odyssey and then realized he hadn't. And he was making a larger point about people. When you say to somebody, oh, I've just listened to Beethoven's Fifth, and people in certain circles will go, oh, you don't know Beethoven's. And he was going, people shouldn't do that because there's so much out there in terms of music and in terms of the classics. And people, will discover, oh my God, I've never read, and by the way, once you start down that road, it's kind of, like, have you read Joyce's Ulysses? No, I haven't, wouldn't even bother trying actually, but with the stream of consciousness, but there's lots of classics. Have you read A Christmas Carol, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, this brought up the Odyssey.
War and Peace.
This brought up the Odyssey, and he in fact recommended this new version of the Odyssey, this new translation by Daniel Mendelsohn. So anyway, he spoke so highly about it. So he said he'd read it, and he said that having read it, every part of his life is affected by it. And he said everywhere he goes, he sees this, and that it's like the best thing that's ever happened, almost like the best thing that's ever happened to him. We couldn't have spoken more nicely about it, more powerfully about it. So anyway, we have purchased said copy of said book, and I have read about 3 or 4 pages of it. This is going to be a challenge for me. I'm going to publicly state that I am planning to try to read this book this year.
As I said earlier.
Phelim said earlier, should you not try and read it this week? And I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah. People go, my challenge is to read this book this week or the next month or the next few weeks.
The reason I can't read it this week is because we're going to be devoted to spending a lot of time organising and working on the October 7 play, which is coming to the Kennedy Centre January 28th. Make sure you get your tickets. Make sure you let people know. And please remember, coming to the end of the year, people thinking about gifts. We have a matching donation at the moment, which we would really like to take full advantage of. So please give what you can. Whatever you give will be doubled. And we are the Unreported Story Society, 501c3, tax deductible. Do it. I'm putting the link up there on the screen.
Unreportedstorysociety.com. Thank you and bye.
Bye.